All right, so we're going to talk about two interrelated concepts. The first is succession, really the kind of establishment and then replacement of species, one upon another after a disturbance. And here we have an example of a fire disturbance, kind of basically burning everything. And then over time, the replacement of one type of ecosystem basically to another until you get to a climax community. And these climax communities are generally stable until, meaning they don't really change, until you get another intense disturbance. So we're going to talk, we'll introduce a few terms and concepts. We'll talk about community changes during succession, including two types of succession, primary and secondary succession, and then ecosystem changes and the disturbance and ecosystem recovery, some of the mechanisms of succession, the community and ecosystem stability. And finally, we're going to talk about restoration ecology. All right, so first, some terms. Succession. Technical definition is the gradual change in plant and animal communities, generally due to the change in plants, in an area following a disturbance. And primary succession, then, is where there is nothing there, okay? Nothing but rock, or nothing but, nothing but the bedrock itself. And secondary succession is where all living matter is basically extirpated somehow, and then you still have the soil there. And then the climax community is the late successional community. That is the stable one, the dominant one, remains until a disturbance occurs. All right, so Rainier's studied changes during succession. This is something you kind of have to, well, you can do it opportunistically, or you can also do it, you can manipulate an area by burning it, but you can also just wait till a forest fire occurs and then also go in and look at it. Or you can look at new developing geological areas, which occurs when glaciers retreat, so it's exposing new primary bedrock, or when volcanoes erupt, they will have new substrate coming out of the ground. So Rainier was looking at plant diversity in succession. As the total number of plant species increased with plot age, so the diversity increased as it got older. Species richness also increased rapidly in the early years after a disturbance, but then started to slowly decrease in the later stages. So not all of the groups increased in density throughout succession, okay? And so you have, if you split them up, these establishment species, mosses, liverworts, and lichens, which can cover bare rock. They were found in the initial stages with our low shrubs and herbs. And low shrubs and herbs kind of stayed pretty constant. Mosses, liverworts, and lichens increased. Trees didn't show up till 33 years later, and then kind of showed a stability after that. No, those tall shrubs is red, and then trees not till 100 years later. So there is obviously a dynamic, a fluidness to ecosystems, especially after a disturbance. So when looking at temperate forests, such as the ones we live in, Oosting looked at woody plant species in the Piedmont Plateau, which is this area right below the Appalachian Mountains. Okay, and what he found was an increase in first plant species during the secondary succession, and in conjunction with that, with the increase in diversity of plants, you had an increase in diversity of different types of birds. Okay, so they were connected, really. All right. Chapin et al. Looked at substantial changes in an ecosystem structured during succession at Glacier Bay. So you have this giant glacier here, and it has retreated over time. As it retreats, it exposes new soil, new substrate, where a colonizing species can then add. What it found was that total soil depth and the depth of all major soil horizons showed significant increase from the pioneer community. So originally you had the pioneer establishers. So basically, as you get further and further away from where the glacier has retreated, you get deeper soil in all the different horizons. In addition to that, organic content, okay, through the substantive increase in biomass production, and those things dying and then building on top of each other, moisture and nitrogen concentrations all increased. All these are going to significantly affect growth. So what he showed was that the physical and biological systems are inseparable. So the soil, the nutrient content, and the ability to grow life are connected. All right, and so this is looking at that successional species and showing over time how organic content, moisture, and nitrogen all increased while other things decreased. So the pH, the bulk density, and the phosphorus all decreased. A chronosequence then is similar to, well, the study at Glacier Bay was a chronosequence where you had basically closest to the glacier where it had just melted the early events of successional change. Further and further out and away from that, you had the later events of successional change. And so areas like this, however, are very rare to be found. But another one are the Hawaiian Islands. So what happened is the Hawaiian Islands is there's basically this spot in the tectonic plates way down in the ocean that has a little hole in it, and lava flows out of it, and it flows out so much that it forms these islands. Well, that has periods of activity and inactivity, and actually it moves. So the oldest island is way out here on the end, Kauai, and it has been around for the longest amount of time. There's also other islands further down which have since sunk, which have been eroded. Hawaii is the newest island, has the most volcanic activity on it, and it is the newest form and biggest one. So as time goes by, however, Hawaii will get smaller, similar to these other islands, and a new island will form as that hot spot moves. But this offers a chronosequence where you have the oldest to youngest and can look at different successional stages among them. So Heaton found differing patterns of nutrient distribution across the chronosequence. So how long since the event which caused the island to appear was correlated with different types of species and nutrients. All right, so there are different models of ecosystem recovery. One is the biomass accumulation model, which separates into 4 different stages. The first stage is reorganization, and that happens in the first 10 to 20 years. And during this stage, you have an overall loss of biomass and nutrients. You don't have enough, basically, species there to hold on to the nutrients. And then after that, you have aggradation, which is for the next 100 or so years. And this is where the ecosystem reaches its peak biomass and peak diversity. Okay, similar to this. So this is looking at bird species, but the plant species would be similar. So in these first few years, you have reorganization. In the next 100 or so years, you have aggradation. And then you have the transition phase where the biomass declines from the peak. Okay, so we haven't really showed it here, but at some point it's going to start to decrease again. And then finally, it'll reach a steady state where the biomass is the same and fluctuates around a mean. All right, another mechanisms of succession include Clement's model, which basically only accounts for facilitation, or facilitation is the only thing that it accounts for the species establishment, which basically, if a species can survive an area, it will, the climatic conditions and the ecological parameters, it will establish and become part of that ecosystem. We'll explain more about it later. Connell and Slater, however, felt there were different things going on, not only facilitation or the ability to live in that environment and establish there, but also tolerance and inhibition. Okay, so their model was more complex and involved different parameters depending on whether a species facilitates another species, whether it tolerates another species, or inhibits another species. All right, so with facilitation, this is where you have one area and many species could be there. And so many species will attempt to colonize this newly available space. But only certain species will initially establish, not necessarily first come, first serve, but maybe the ones most suited for the environment. These are called pioneer species. And they can modify the environment so it becomes more suitable for species of later successional stages, while at the same time reducing its suitability for itself. Okay, and these grasses will establish, or mosses, and that will facilitate the establishment of grasses, which will facilitate the establishment of shrubs and herbs, which will facilitate the establishment of trees. Okay, and then you have the climax community, where it no longer facilitates anything and instead inhibits other things. So tolerance then is where the initial stages of colonization are not limited to pioneer species, basically whatever can among the ecological parameters establish, and if it happens to be there, it will. Okay, and then later species will add to the environment as they establish. And once you no longer have species that can tolerate those environmental problems, or environmental conditions, then you will have your climax community. Inhibition then is where one species prevents other species from establishing. And early arrivals would then inhibit colonization by later arrivals, and this assures late successional species dominate. Okay, so the ones that are most competitive are going to prevent anything else, either by shading or soaking up all the nutrients, competitive biological factors, or physical factors as well. All right, so some more terms. Stability is the absence of change. So a stable environment is one in which you have a climax community. Resistance is the ability to maintain structure and function in the face of potential disturbance. So how well can it resist change when a storm blows through or when a fire comes through? And resilience then is the ability to bounce back after a disturbance. So a resilient ecosystem is one that can absorb really the, not necessarily absorb it, but after a disturbance can quickly recover. So restoration ecology is involved in the stability, the ability to help ecosystems recover and be restored to something that approximates their original habitat. Okay, and it's been suggested that it's essentially the manipulation of succession in order to achieve some predetermined goal. So you're using these mechanisms of succession, finding ways in which you can help them along. So we're going to look at one type of restoration ecology, and that's looking at tropical forests. So Diaz et al. Added forest floor litter and seeded mining tailings to a tropical forest that had been deforested. What he found was that the tailings promoted faster plant growth, gave it nutrients, also greater leaf area, increased plant richness and had higher seed densilings. Another similar study looked at tree branches in landslides in Puerto Rico, and found that branches, adding them to these landslides, acted as perches for birds, and so that helped seed dispersal. So a bird would come, land there, and poop out all the seeds it ate. Those seeds would then establish in that area, and that helped the community recover much faster than when areas that didn't have perches. And this is a figure displaying that data. All right, that's it.